The following story happened to a friend named Melissa, and it happened more or less a year ago. My friends and I are used to going to the town of General Zaragoza in Nuevo León, a municipality that is approximately 4.5 or 5 hours from where we live in Monterrey. It should be noted that my friend is a very good driver. She has experience since she was a child and knows the way to that town well. She knows the signs on trunks, gas stations and others. The day it all happened, I had gone to the town in a friend's car and we were already installed in the hotel. It only remained for us to wait for the others to arrive, my friend Melissa, her sister, and 2 other friends who came with her. It is said that at about 10 at night they were about to arrive at the town. They had already taken the first entrance and were on the road that would take them to the second, which already leads them to the town. She already knew well at what height the trunk was, very well lit, and with a warning that announced the name of said section. Likewise, that night, she had already calculated with how much gasoline they would reach the last gas station that was before the town. Everything was under control. The 2 friends who were with her in the back were drinking since they left Monterrey, and obviously they had already asked her several times to stop at the edge of the road to urinate. Disturbed a little and eager to get there, he decided not to stop until he at least grabbed the second trunk and advanced further in the path. In that, typical of alcoholics on dark and desolate roads, one of the girls who were behind, my friend Susanna, began to say, "Imagine that a witch would appear to us right now." Melissa is Catholic but not a fanatic believer in paranormal events since she has had multiple experiences, so she told him, "Shut up, because you don't know what you say if one of us is going to appear." Susanna, a little drunk and very skeptical of these issues, said, "Well, let's see if it's true that one of us will appear, let's see." Beliza repeated that he shut up a couple of times more, when, at a certain point, he realized that they should have already taken the entrance. According to his calculations and the knowledge of the road, they should have already taken the exit, and there was nothing, only darkness. There was no more light than the one that gave his car and the moon. She was surprised because that had never happened to her. She realized that the gas was running out and that neither her cell phone nor her sister's had a signal. There was no way to know where they were. She began to get nervous because she did not know what to do. 2 of the passengers were drunk and obviously did not help at all, and her sister, younger than her, began to get scared when she saw her own nervousness. To top it off, Susanna asked him to stop again, that he needed to go to the bathroom. Very upset and forced, Melissa stopped next to the road for Susanna to leave, and also for her to take advantage and give herself some time to think about what she was wrong about. She asked her sister if she really hadn't seen the exit, and she assured her that she didn't, that she was following the whole journey and had seen the same as she did. Only darkness. At that moment, in the distance, after her eyes began to get used to the darkness, she saw that, near a stone, there were 4 figures that were more dark than the night itself. I don't know how, but she realized they were women. Long-haired women. Their clothes were also completely black. And they looked at them fixedly without making any movement. Very scared, she decided not to tell anything to the others or her sister or the hybrids behind, so she only asked them to get on, and she started as fast as she could without turning to her left, which was where the women were. He began to curse in his mind or in a low voice and followed his path, begging God to know where he was. After a few minutes, his sister told him that his cell phone already had a signal and that, according to the map, they had passed the entrance more than half an hour ago. My friend turned, nervous to meet the women again, now on the lane she was going. After a while he saw it, finally, the lighted trunk. It was impossible not to have seen it. He turned very surprised with his sister and drove to Durazpenas to the next gas station, and later finally to the town. He says it was something very strange, that he cannot explain, but he attributes it to Susanna. She challenged or invoked something, somehow, that night. I want to share this story asking for the great favor of being published anonymously, since I was strictly forbidden to talk about the subject by my company, which is dedicated to telecommunications. In 2006, a new work began in a hill in the Guerrero area. It had been more than 2 years and could not be finished, since the workers continuously resigned and, without saying more, did not return to work. I assumed it was because of the organized crime in the region, since people were continually executed or beheaded in that hill. And although, as far as I know, they never got involved with the people who worked on the work, we saw ourselves in the need to hire more people from that area and go personally to supervise the work. When I arrived, the first few days we took photos of the work with my old 3-megapixel digital camera to report the progress, and we gave ourselves the task of building a temporary camp so as not to have to leave there until the work was finished. Sometimes it caught my attention, during the day, to hear very close voices, but I never saw anything. I thought they were from the town that was about 15 kilometers in a straight line from that hill. I thought that somehow those echoes reached there. Although, the truth is that it sounded very clear to think that they came from so far away. There came a time when I no longer took it seriously. Sometimes laughter was heard as if they were celebrating something, but still, after a while, we learned to ignore it. The supplies were bought in the nearest town an hour by the roadside and the steeped areas between the mountains. Apparently it was close, but it was a real trip to go and return the same day. But there was a rule that we were very insistently emphasized, and it was that no one left the camp after 5 in the afternoon for security reasons. We even strictly prohibited to explore the area of the Cerro del Rodeo in its surroundings. They told us that there was a very poisonous snake and that a bite meant a death sentence, since the population with the nearest hospital was more than 5 hours away. At least that's what they told us. But we didn't imagine that the truth would be different. One Thursday we ran out of tape and other materials, so we had to go to the town to buy it. His absence stopped us from the work and we were forced to finish and leave there since it was a place tremendously boring after you got used to the horrible heat, the lack of distractions and the abundant population of various types of scorpions that were everywhere. It was 2 in the afternoon and I asked the workers who wanted to accompany me. Only one was encouraged. The hutch, a worker of about 50 years, very amiable and funny. We arrived near 4 at that only hardware store that was in the town. The owner, Donchenko, very friendly but serious, did us the favor of gathering what we needed from the list while we ate with Doña Chata in that picturesque town, very much in the style of Guerrero. When we were preparing to leave, Donchenko asked us, "Inji, and where are you going to sleep?" I told him that in the camp, and with a look of surprise he told us, "No, don't go there anymore. It's 6 o'clock. I replied that he should not worry, that the truck we were driving was 4x4 and that I already knew the way. And again he told me, "Stay to sleep in my house and go early." The truth is, I was stubborn and almost offended because I thought he believed that I did not have the ability to drive on those roads at night. I told him not to worry and not to be offended, but I wanted to get to the camp that same day to continue with the work from as early as possible the next day. We got in the truck and left the town. And that was a grave mistake. When we entered the mountain with the direction of the rodeo hill, the darkness of the night fell on us and the circular between the trees on the road was dark. I was making jokes to Hutch and turning off the light of the truck circulating, and we really did not see beyond our nose. We reached a point where there was a light between the trees, and we saw the tip of another hill where the stars were seen by thousands due to the lack of light, so beautiful that we stopped to see them. You could not distinguish the constellations of so many stars that there were, and he told me, astonished, "Rock Dije, look up there on the hill, those lights." I turned around and saw that there were like 10 or 15 lights like dancing above the hill. I can describe them as when a paper is burned, and its movement was like when a large paper is burned and it rises by the wind but with will in its direction. Suddenly, to our amazement, we saw that these lights were coming down from the hill in our direction, and by instinct we raised the windows and put the fuses on, and I tore everything that was in the truck, entering again into the trees. But I don't know when they reached us, and I saw them through the rearview mirror. I couldn't go faster because the road wasn't very wide and I was always next to the precipice, so a bad maneuver would take us to the bottom of a ravine. I only listened to the sobs of the Hoke asking what those things were, why they were behind us. I yelled at him to calm down, not to see them, to fix his sight on the front. Then I realized that next to me was one of those lights of fire, and inside the flames I would swear that I managed to see something like the face of a woman who was looking for my gaze. When I looked back at the road, we almost left the bend, with 3 tires on the road and 1 flying in the ravine. The lights were spinning around us like pushing us to fall. I activated the 4x4 and put it in reverse. The 3 tires that were still touching the ground worked like never before, and I only heard the ground rumbling with the truck until it took us out of the fall and I started the road again. I can't say how much longer they followed us, but it seemed like an eternity to me until they suddenly dispersed. When we arrived at the camp we stopped and we were both in silence without realizing it. When we got off we went straight to the tents and we slept, or at least we tried to. Days and time passed, we finished the work and left there. When I arrived at the office to make the work report, I entered data, formulas, times and images of the site in the presentation, of how we found it and how we finished it. After a while, my supervisor and the manager called me to complain about why we had reported the payment of 4 workers when there had really been 6, and I told them not at all. Where did they get that information? Then I saw my report projected on the screen of the boardroom. There was my first photo when I arrived at the unfinished work. As I received it, on one side there were 2 workers shoveling cement mix, one carrying a pot with cement and the third Hutch standing next to the truck drinking water. But next to him, as if they were accompanying him, there were 2 more figures, a person with a black hood and someone else without a shirt with white pants. Ancones amazed I could not explain the image and the truth. The report I did quickly because I no longer wanted to know anything about that place. Immediately I ran to my computer and looked for the image folder and looked for that one precisely to open it, and when I expanded it what I saw gave me a chill. The hooded man seemed more like death and the other guy, the shirtless man, seemed to have goat legs. After that I changed departments and I no longer go out to the field to do that type of work. However, long after I heard from the engineer who arrived there after me that around the site they were still hearing laughter. I currently work for private security, so I would appreciate if my personal information was kept anonymous, also because the people I am going to mention in this story work or worked in very important branches of military security. At the age of 20, I decided to enlist myself in the army. Since I was a child, I longed to be a policeman or a soldier. When I was just a single soldier, a general arrived at the barracks looking for new escorts, single soldiers like me or cabos or sergeants that were their bodyguards. My companions refused such work, not only because it was too much responsibility, but because it was a very heavy job. If being a soldier is very, very difficult, now being a general's guard is much more so. I did accept. I preferred 1,000 times to be driving around in a truck all over the city than to continue standing guard in a forgotten booth on the top of a hill. Unlike my other superiors, the general turned out to be much more educated, much kinder to us, and always focused on his work. It always seemed to me that he was a person with nerves of steel. I never saw fear in his eyes, nor did I hear a trembling voice coming out of his mouth, even though he had to give very, very delicate orders. I never saw any sign of doubt or terror in him. Until that night. It was a very hot night. After receiving a message in code, the general gave us the order to drive to a town called San Antonio de los Alazanes. When we arrived, we saw that our companions, but belonging to another battalion, had placed a stop. The general asked there for the officer in charge, but they told him that he had retired. When he inquired further, he was told that several of the soldiers had suffered some kind of nervous crisis because of something that had happened in the Pantheon, a few hundred meters from there. He gave us the quick order to load our rifles and remain alert, and we headed there. Even he, who only carried a short weapon and with counted shots, prepared to enter that Pantheon with us. Once there, we noticed an area of common graves, which had very few of being created, possibly less than a day. And in one there were bodies that apparently belonged to members of organized crime. According to what they told us, they apparently had some kind of combat. But the bodies had no eyes or tongue. And on their faces, on many of them, were engraved the horror marks with which they died. The general asked me and a comrade to stay to guard the bodies, as if someone in his own right would like to come and see them. He and another comrade went to talk to the sergeant who was in charge of the detainment. We lasted more than 15 minutes there, alone with those corpses that had once been children, brothers, parents of someone. And now they were just bodies. By radio the general gave us the order to return and go with him to some nearby offices. On the way he told us that the lieutenant reported to the villagers, that group of corpses abandoned a few meters from the Pantheon, a few kilometers from the town, that no villager knew how or who had left them there. Someone said that these criminals were preparing land for the sowing of marijuana, and in a moment they had ended up like this. I remember that. And well, the general finished telling this that I narrate to you, the driver of our truck, when turning by the rearview mirror, saw that 6 balls of fire were there, flying over the Pantheon, turning, shrinking and growing. When he alerted us, we all turned incredulous, without knowing what to say or what to think. It was the strangest night of my life, and one of the most terrifying as well. I resigned a year later. Currently I work in private security of a warehouse in Monterrey as a monitorista. I never knew what happened to that group of men that, although they were doing something wrong, ran with very bad luck to end up like this. Some of the few people to whom I have told this story tell me that those lights were actually witches, and that these men probably got into doing illegal things in a place guarded by those women with mystical powers. I really do not know. And really, I never want to know. This is the first time I share something with the community. It's one of the strongest experiences I've had in my life. And I know it's going to be hard to believe. After more than a year of happening, I don't even finish believing it completely. I'm not a religious person. Quite the opposite. I'm an IPN student and I hope to study industrial chemistry. So, obviously, my perception of the world is based on science, but despite that, since I was a child I have been very perceptive of paranormal phenomena, and that is why I am not skeptical of them. My family is from Guadalajara, and those who are from there will know that many things are said about the Sentinel Forest. My grandmother used to tell me something that happened supposedly when she was about 13 years old. The family had gone camping in the woods. She, at night, as it usually happens, began to tell horror stories. Among them, the one of a witch who, it was said, overflew that forest in the shape of a lettuce. A black and huge lettuce. They said that he took some unfortunate man he found walking through the forest in the middle of the night. Also, that the witch took her prisoners to the lagoon of Chapala and that there she performed rituals with human sacrifices. My grandmother had an uncle who did not believe in this type of thing, and he made fun of this story. He said he could go into the forest, spend the night cursing and challenging the witch, and return as if nothing had happened. He ignored the warnings of everyone else, and despite the fact that they tried to persuade him, he began to walk into the depths of the forest while shouting with exultant words that the witch did not exist, that he could not take her. He repeated that, losing himself in the darkness, and little by little the voice was ceasing to be heard. My grandmother said that it had not been more than half an hour, when they saw how a huge bird flew with its legs to its uncle, who looked small as if he were a mouse, while he shouted to everyone asking for help. He never heard from him again. When I was a child, this story terrified me, but as I grew up, I began to doubt its veracity. That, until June of last year. I went with my boyfriend to spend 2 weeks of vacation in Guadalajara. We arrived one Saturday and just the next, a week later, we went to the Chapala Lagoon. We camped in a hill near the southern edge of the lagoon. When the night fell, I told my boyfriend this same story, although of course I told him that I doubted that it was true. He, anyway, told me that he did not believe that it was the best that we were there. My boyfriend is also very prone to experiencing paranormal phenomena and has lived even more things of this type than me. He said that witches have an olfactory system for people who don't believe in them. Something like what they say about certain animals that can smell your fear. It was around midnight. We were lying in the trunk of the car watching the starry sky. A sky that we can't enjoy like this in Mexico City. Everything seemed to be fine, completely normal. We talked about the most quiet when we felt a chill, both at the same time. He sat down and looked around, and he felt very alarmed. I suddenly felt nervous and insecure, and I told him that it was best to go to sleep. He gave me the reason, and when we were going to the country house, he turned to the lagoon. He told me to turn to sea. And there, in the distance, we could see a huge bird. In the middle of the darkness, we saw how it crossed the lagoon, pinking the water. It rose and flew straight towards us. We wanted to protect ourselves in the car, but we couldn't open it. I want to think that because of the nerves and fear, he wasn't able to open the door. I asked for the keys and tried to open it from the other side, but it couldn't be done. He took my hand and we started running down. I remember very well that even though that thing was planning, his wings, when hit by the wind, emitted a kind of buzz, and the sound that made the wing really shook me. Before someone thinks, perhaps, in the stories of sightings of the man Palia or Botman, I assure you that this was not that creature. What was chasing us was literally a giant milking cow, about 2 meters high, and 5 meters with the wings extended. Black, completely black, although the chest and the face were a little lighter, enough to let us see that she had no eyes. That image caused me nightmares even a long time later, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of this creature. At first our escape was more complicated because it was downhill and there was no obstacle tree that interfered with the flight of this thing, but when we finally entered an area where there were trees, this had to increase the distance and fly over them. We continued running until we approached the nearest town, and eventually we came across a church. Around there was a tall fence. I remember that my boyfriend jumped, and as he could, he tripped on her, although she was very tall. Then he extended his arm to me and I jumped as far as I could to take him. With effort he helped me up and I hurt my hands because the bar had many stones and cement rubble. We ran through a pantheon towards a chapel that was seen at the entrance. The witch began to speak to us. She called us by our name. I covered my ears. Her voice bothered me a lot and I could not stop listening to it, as if she were talking to me in my ear. My boyfriend began to groan, hurt by the jump he had made, but we finally reached the chapel. With effort we entered and he stopped to close the doors of this light. My boyfriend felt that a claw scratched him just before he closed the door. He fell to my side. We hugged and there we stayed listening to how the witch turned like flying over us, as if she were a vulture. A while later, which seemed eternal to me, she stopped listening. Shortly after, the sailor arrived and took us coffee and let us spend a night there with him. The old man told us many stories about this witch. He said that very rarely he approached the towns so much, that at night he flew but that he made it very high, that he could hardly see. He said that he many times in the silence of the night he managed to hear his footsteps, and as this occasion in particular heard them approaching, he ran to take refuge in the nearby church. He also told us that many assure haber visto una señora que sub al cerro más alto del llano y allí se quita los ojos y comienza a dar vueltas hasta convertirse en una alchuza que se va volando y que cuando regresa siempre trae alguien entre las patas. Nadie nos dijo ha visto donde aterriza para hacer sus rituals, but it is said that they have found altars and evidence of black mass in different places of the area. Sometimes there are human parts near these. When the Lord rose, he took the father of the church, and cured our wounds with holy water. And it is said that the wounds of a witch only the lava can be closed in this way. We were hurt, scared, with scratches, but alive. The watchman even taught us how to, in quotes, knock down the witches so as not to be defenseless if we ran into one again, if it were not for the wounds we suffered. Because of the scars that they have left us. I would have thought that all of that was a nightmare. We went back for our things, we picked up everything and we went back to Guadalajara. And maybe many think I'm crazy. They don't believe me or think we're drunk or drunk. I really don't care. I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and those who believe me. Thank you very much, really. Since I've been following this channel for a few years, I've wanted to write you this story every October. For some reason I didn't feel comfortable doing it, but today I finally dare, and I hope you have the opportunity to read it. All this happens in a small place about 2 hours from Mexico City. A place already a little stuck in the mountains that is popular among Boy Scouts and people who like camping, with large spaces to camp and also with a few cabins for those who want a slightly more comfortable experience. I met this place when I was a child. My father was originally from a town very close from there, although practically all his life he did it here in the capital. However, of all the times I went to walk and camp, it was never him. When we all went together to the town to visit his family, we always stayed in the town, but when I was alone with my cousins and my dad was not there, we always had the opportunity to go up to that place for at least a while and walk through the forest. I'm going to tell you some stories that happened in that place. The first of them happened to me in 2015, and it was the one that triggered me to meet later, a little more of the mystery that surrounds it. As the three occurred precisely this month, I have titled my story, The Witches of October. When I had my first car, the first thing I did was start walking to all the places I had not had the opportunity to go before. One of my cousins had. I had gone to that place at the exit of the town, and he told me it was a perfect place to go camping with my girlfriend. I invited her and she accepted, but she told me she didn't like camping, that she preferred that we stay in a cabin and she paid for it. That's what we did. We reserved a cabin and we headed to spend a quiet weekend away from the bustle of the city and the traffic. We arrived on Friday night to dinner at my uncle's house in the town, and past 9 o'clock they told us that we would not be able to get there before they closed us. So we decided to stay there and go up to Saturday morning. The truth is that it did not hurt to waste a night already paid because we had a very pleasant time with my family. Saturday was also very pleasant. As we went up, we walked for a while. My girlfriend took a lot of pictures and then we even made a meal in a campfire. In that place there is a very bad signal. There are very specific places where it only gets there. And the data from the cell phone, they arrive only for moments, so we thought that disconnection from your normal life could be reassuring. We were about to regret it. It was about 8 at night when I received a Facebook message from one of my cousins. I had not seen him the night before, although he also lives with these guys. His message caused me great discomfort. "I'm sorry I didn't see you, cousin. I know they went camping. Take care. I know it sounds weird, but trust me, it's much better to camp as far as you can from the cabins area." The message didn't say anything else. I asked him why he said it, but my message did not come out. I noticed then that the two of us were the only ones in the cabin area. My girlfriend had made me coffee, and although I wanted to think that this message from my cousin was a warning without importance, I could not take it off my head. Then we went to sleep. And after a very long chat, I began to forget a little about the bad moment. I woke up a little later, alerted by my girlfriend's voice, nervous. Apparently she had a nightmare and told me she felt as if someone was walking over the cabin. "I don't hear anything," I said. "Try to sleep." I stayed awake for several minutes and couldn't hear anything. But a while later I woke up again. "No pasa nada," I told my girlfriend, "but I'm going to check if that makes you calmer." That's what I did. There was nothing around the cabin, and I had not seen anyone else in the place. If someone else was camping there that night, they must be no less than a kilometer away. I went in to try to reassure her, and I noticed that she stayed a while on her cell phone, surely to try to get rid of it nervous. I fell asleep almost immediately. About an hour later, Already around 4 in the morning, another sound woke me up, that of my cell phone. It had a message from my cousin, which I surely had sent several hours before. Something very strange happened to me the last time I went camping at the beginning of the month. I was with several friends and suddenly some girls asked us for help. They were in the cabins. They said they had scared them. For being brave, we told them to stay in our camp with our group, while one of my friends and I were going to check. When we went to the cabin, we found a scene. Scary. Scary for some reason, although maybe you think it's nonsense. But on the roof of the cabin there were three ladies sitting in a circle, talking with total tranquility. I didn't see what they were doing, but they all moved their hands while talking to each other, although they all talked at the same time. I could say they were weaving, but that would not make sense. When we saw them, my friend started running back to our group and then I saw them all turn. They stopped, but before seeing anything else, I also ran to our camp. We were awake for a while. Then the girls stayed in our country houses and we slept, still nervous, next to the camp. There are strange people out there in the cabins lately. That's why I tell you that you better not get too close. As soon as I finished reading the message, I felt as if it had a huge weight on me. And then I could feel, to put it in a way, that someone was walking on the roof. I mean, I couldn't hear anything, but I felt the vibration, the steps. I tried to wake my girlfriend up without making much noise. I felt that I had to wake her up in case something happened, that she was alert, or I don't know. Maybe I wanted her to calm me down now, to tell me that nothing happened, that there was no one on the roof and that it was just my imagination. When I finally managed to wake her up, she asked me what was happening to me. There's someone on the roof. No, of course there's nothing. Go back to sleep. No, it's serious, I said. There's someone. Listen. We listened then with attention, in the silence of the night. 1, 2, 3 seconds. And suddenly it sounded like something, or someone fell with enough force to shake the whole cabin. Good night. The voice of a woman was heard screaming from outside, making fun of us. We ran. We got to the car just as we were in pajamas and accelerated to the entrance, closed, already with chains. We fell asleep there, in the car next to the entrance, until a boy woke us up who opened in the morning. We told him what happened to us and, without refuting anything, he told us that he could accompany us for our things if we did not dare to go alone. When we arrived we realized that everything was crowded in the cabin, all our things were watered, some even out of place, but there was absolutely nothing missing. When we went down to the town, my family received us all that day and never put our story in doubt. My cousin, the one who sent me the message, listened to it even with particular attention, and then called his friends to tell them. My girlfriend was quite nervous and even very early in the afternoon we could leave back to the city. When I told my dad about my horrible experience in that place, he scolded me very ugly and told me that he always made it clear that it was not good to climb that mountain area, unless at that time of the year. I asked him why, and he told me then his experiences with the October witches. I noticed that it was not easy for him to do it. After all, I had spent my whole life without him telling me those experiences in particular, and from what I know, not even my mother knew them with that attitude. The first thing that happened was when he was still a child. He was very, very small, about 4 years old, but for the terrible memory, he decided to have it in his memory with total clarity, as if it had happened yesterday. But it happened. One October of many years ago. He was then the smallest of the cousins, and everyone took him from one side to the other, consenting him because he was very chubby and gave a rather tender appearance. So it was as on one occasion the cousins took him to that area of the mountain to camp. The oldest of them was going with his girlfriend, but none would go past the age of 3 or 14. When they arrived at the area where the cabins are now, they began to play hide and seek, running from one side to the other, laughing and enjoying a family afternoon. My father was going to the hand of his cousin's girlfriend, who, for being the oldest woman, was given that responsibility to take care of the youngest child, obviously due to the somewhat sexist education of that time. They ran to hide and my dad did not stop laughing, funny, but as he moved away a little, from among the trees came out his cousin, the mayor, who took his girlfriend by the hand and asked my dad to run back to the others, without much concern. My dad started running as far as he thought he was. The rest of his cousins were there, however, he did not find them. He swears he got to the same place, but there was absolutely no one. He wanted to go back then to where he had left his cousin and girlfriend, but he did not give up the place either. By this time he was already crying desperately for the fear of being lost in the forest. Besides, the night was not long in falling. Suddenly he heard voices talking in the distance, and followed it. He could not see anything, but he kept running trying to follow that sound. Suddenly, a voice that he felt familiar for some reason, began to call him. "Over here. Come." Ben, although he did not recognize her, his voice gave him confidence, and he thought it could be one of his aunts, perhaps someone who had gone up to look for them. He began to move away. He already had several minutes walking, going up the mountain more and more, following that voice. The fog began to appear between the trees, and although he had not seen horror movies by then, he knew that it was a scene that represented danger. Suddenly he saw her. A few meters from him, sticking out in a tree. An old woman calling him with a big smile. "Come, come," she said, and gestured with her hand for him to come closer. He was a 4-year-old boy, alone in the forest, and he was there without knowing whether to approach a stranger or run and get lost again. He took a few steps towards her, and suddenly he began to hear the screams of all his cousins calling him. Some arms then raised him from his back and then began to run with him. "No, don't turn, they said, and then he recognized the voice. It was his cousin's girlfriend who ran down with him in her arms and shouted for the others. My dad turned back and saw the old woman running after them at an inhuman speed, but seconds later he heard all his cousins. They had found them and everyone scolded him. They said they had been screaming at him everywhere for hours and he simply did not come out. My scared dad still swore he had not heard them. The adults of the family, to whom they had already alerted a while before he had been lost, began to arrive at the place. They no longer let him gather alone with his older cousins. But no one forbade them to continue climbing. Only my father and his cousin's girlfriend had seen the woman. However, no one else believed them. It began to be told only as one more story of terror, of those that abound in the area, and no one took seriously the appearance of that lady. And well, the truth is that there are several stories about it in the family, and even now that I have already talked about it, it seems to be something known in the town, but I just want to focus on what happened to me and what my dad told me later. And this is the next story. When I was almost the same age as him, I was in high school and I already lived in Mexico City. That time when he got lost in the woods had become just a bad memory, although he always had the same precaution when climbing up to that area of the place. In fact, he preferred not to do it, although he had to get closer. It was already almost the end of October, a weekend, when he came to visit the family in the village. Some of his younger cousins had gone up to spend the day in the mountains, and he just thought about how everyone else could do it with total normality, when for him that had already become an almost impossible mission. He was talking to his aunts when suddenly he began to hear a scandal that came from the street. When they went out to see what was happening, a scene struck them, a child bathed in blood to which several men were carrying looking for help, screaming that they had found him in a ravine not very far from there. The aunts then became hysterical because he was one of the children who had climbed with my father's cousins. He ran up to the truck of one of the neighbors who also had a child in the mountain and who accelerated to go to look for them. He saw how other trucks were speeding behind them. It was barely 5 in the afternoon, but the fog was starting to eat up the mountain. To leave it in the total darkness, this would be very difficult to find them. The thunder at a distance announced a storm shortly after, and everyone knew that if something had happened, they were going to the clock to reach the boys. My father's desperation to find his cousins was so great that he could hardly think of the fear that normally gave him that place. The important thing now was to find them before they came across what he saw many years ago. What happened next is extremely strange. A group of young people who participated in the search began to hear a scandal in the mountain. Near them, what seemed to be a group of women laughing and cursing them, the people of the town. Perhaps, without knowing the legends of the place, they looked for those women everywhere following their voices. However, they could never find them. The voices, yes, they came to hear right next to him, although they never saw them and did not discover where they came from. The echoes of the mountain play bad jokes, they thought later. But let me tell you that, precisely at that same moment, but on the other side of the mountain, another group, my father's, would come across something scary. There were 3 people, including the neighbor of about 50 years old, and 2 young people a little older than my father. They walked separately for about 10 meters each to cover more space in the search. When the snarl of the senior mayor alerted them, they approached him thinking the worst, that he had found the children and that something had happened to them. But when they got to him, he could only point a point about 60 meters from where they were. It was the top of a ridge, where there was a circular, flat place, and in it, several ladies, completely naked, with very long gray hair, were sitting in a circle. They seemed to drink, laugh, next to a bonfire that threw a large column of gray smoke. And he says they seemed to laugh, because not a single sound came out of that place, despite being so close. They noticed at that moment, then, the absolute silence around. Not even the animals seemed to make any noise, and they could practically hear their pulse getting faster and faster by terror. They came down running, rushing to do it before it completely darkened, or these women saw them. And when they reached the other group, someone told them that the children were already in the village. When they came down, they were found safe, but dead of fear. They said they had come down running because some witches started to run them through the trees. The strangest thing is that they came down exactly on the same path that the groups that were going to look for them climbed. However, they never saw each other, since then, each one who went to the town. My dad was terrified if he saw a column of smoke coming from some part of the mountain and never for any reason returned to climb some day of October.